around the bicentennial, they did some more research and discovered that the actual Mackey house wasn't this house at all. It was a separate house that stood closer down here towards the river. If you guys know where the Sibley Mill is, the big mill there, we think it was somewhere in that direction. It doesn't stand anymore, unfortunately. But like I said, once they discovered this house actually wasn't built until 1797, so this house wasn't even here during the war, so it couldn't have been the house where those men were hanged out. And the actual Mackey house was made of stone. This house obviously was made of wood. It was white. These are the original colors of this house, the grayish blue and the red. And the Mackey house is about 80 yards from the river, so we're further up from that. So basically it was a mistake. They had the wrong place. But it's a good mistake because we still have the house today. The reason this house was restored and preserved after all those years was because they thought it was the Mackey house. So, and with that, of course, came all the stories of the men being hanged on the porch and those sort of things. You probably heard all the, you count to the 13th step and that sort of thing. Tell me things all the time. But like I said, as far as we know, no, it didn't actually happen here. It did really happen, just not here at this house, but close down this way. So as far as we know, no one's ever been murdered here. People probably died here over the years. It is an old house. But I haven't seen anything unusual since I've been here. I've been here about 2 years. Like I said, this house became a museum in 1964, and the Augusta Museum of History is who operates it currently. We took it over a couple of years ago. Made a couple changes to it. The main thing we did is we put some informational panels here in the hallway to kind of walk you through the story of the house and Ezekiel Harris. So I'm going to walk you through some of these panels and through the rooms, and any questions you have on anything, just let me know. Okay? We'll start you off by showing this first panel here. This will explain to you a little bit about who Ezekiel Harris was. We unfortunately don't know a lot about his early life, actually. What we do know is he was born in Edgefield, South Carolina. I know you guys are familiar with Edgefield. Born there in 1757, built this house in 1797, so he's about 40 years old when he built this house. Certainly not a young man in those days, would have been well past middle age at that point. And no record of him coming from a wealthy family, but he must have acquired a pretty good amount of money as a young man in order to build a house like this. This would be considered a mansion, certainly in 1797. Now he bought the land that his house stood on in 1794, 3 years before he built the house. He purchased 323.5 acres, so we're just on a small section of that today. And today we refer to that acreage as the village of Harrisburg. You guys have probably heard of Harrisburg, right? You're in Harrisburg right now. Named after Ezekiel Harris. Harrisburg was its own city for many years. Since it's been incorporated into Augusta. But we still call the area Harrisburg, named after Ezekiel Harris. And I actually read some accounts from around 1800 that refer to this area as Harrisburg, even though at that time, of course, it wasn't a village like it is today. There were no other buildings here. It would just been Ezekiel Harris and his family living in his house. He had a small working farm on his property here somewhere as well. But we think that Harris named the place after himself. He was that kind of a guy. He thought he'd call this land Harrisburg. He actually wanted to rival the city of Augusta and start his own city here. Augusta at the time, of course, was much smaller than it is today. Pretty much the downtown of Augusta was the entire city at that point. So that was about 2 miles here down Broad Street. So Harris thought if I build my house right here, tobacco being the major crop at that time, tobacco merchants who were bringing their tobacco from what we call the upcountry, land that's north and west of here, would bring their tobacco by wagon down these older roads like Broad Street, known as tobacco roads because they bring tobacco down to the city. And they trade their tobacco down there, and Harris thought if I build my house here, when they come by, I'll intercept them before they get to the city of Augusta. I'll buy all the tobacco from them. I'll turn around and sell it and make a big profit and squeeze out all my competition in Augusta. Harris, when he first moved here, wanted to get people to his property, so one of his ideas was to open up a ferry boat that ran right down here on the Savannah River. Back then, if you wanted to cross from South Carolina over here to Georgia, you had to take a boat. There were no bridges at that time. So Harris opened up a free ferry. He didn't charge admission for people to use it. But this angered a man named John Hammond. John Hammond was living across the river in what was then called Campbellton, South Carolina. You guys have heard of Hammond's Ferry? That was him. Here he operated a ferry from that side of the river. He charged a toll. That's how he made his living. So of course everyone was coming along and taking Harris's fare because it's free. And Hammond loses a lot of business from that. Hammond actually ends up suing Ezekiel Harris in court in 1799 and wins $2,000 of Harris's money. Hammond had the rights from the South Carolina government to operate his boat, and Harris didn't, so he was forced to pay off. He actually sued him in federal court. To pay off that debt, Harris was forced to mortgage off the lot that his house stood on. So he's only lived here about a year or so. He's already having to mortgage off his property. So again, we don't think he had all that much wealth in reserve after building the house. Now this starts a feud with John Hammond that continues for the next couple of years. Each wrote accounts in the local newspaper, blaming the other for different things, warning other people, hey, don't do business with the other guy because he's crooked, that sort of thing. They said all kind of horrible stuff in the paper constantly. The selection we have up there on the panel comes from a time when Ezekiel Harris woke up one morning and found that his ferry boat had been mysteriously destroyed in the middle of the night. Somebody came with an axe and chopped up his boat. So he writes, basically, I have good reason to believe that John Hammond was the instigator of this legibility. And he goes on to offer a reward of $500 to anyone who knows anything about it. And that's just one example. We have many examples of the two men feuding in the local paper. The rivalry actually came to a tragic end in 1800 with the murder of John Hammond. Somebody set fire to Hammond's home over in South Carolina, and when he fled the home, he was shot. He eventually died from those wounds. Now, no one's ever brought to trial for that murder. Of course, it seems kind of fishy. A lot of people thought that Harris had something to do with it, considering the nature of the two men's rivalry. And Harris didn't really have the best reputation in the 10 years that he lived here. He was involved in at least 9 court cases that I've come across. Always being sued for different things, being arrested for different things. Actually was arrested for murder in a separate case, which he was acquitted of. But all of this really hurt his reputation, which of course hurt his business. And a major court case that hurt him financially was the last one there you see. In 1804, he was loaned a large sum of money from a local firm here in Augusta. We're not sure what for, but he was supposed to pay him back in 90 days. He couldn't do it, so they sued him. And he eventually had to pay them back $6,144.66. And that's what forced him to sell all the land that he had acquired here in Harrisburg. The original 323.5 acres. He sold it all off, lot by lot. The families moved in, built their homes, and that's actually what populated the village of Harrisburg. And so in a way, he did start his own city here, but not the way he had intended, because he had to sell off all his land to do it. And we know that by 1807, he didn't live here anymore. He had moved to Wilkes County, Georgia. You guys familiar with Wilkes County, where Washington, Georgia is? And he lived there the rest of his life. Died in 1829 at the age of 71. But when he died, he had no property and no money to his name. So, the next family to move into this house was the Pearson family. George Pearson was a wealthy landowner from Augusta. He bought the house in 1809, moved in here with his family. Lived here until his death in 1818, and when he died, he left the house to his daughter, Arabella. That's Arabella up there on the panel. And she had married into the Walker family. That's her husband, George Augustus Beverly Walker. And the Walkers were a very prominent family in the early 19th century Augusta. If you guys have heard of W.H.T. Walker and Freeman Walker, it was all relatives of the Walker family. They owned a lot of land in this area. Those two lived here for just a few years, but they passed the house through the Walker family for the next couple generations. And so, the first half of the 19th century, the Walker family lived here for many decades. And during that time, this house is always referred to as the mansion, wherever I've read about it. So, I'm sure it was very decorative, even nicer than when the Harris family lived here, actually. Now, by the Civil War, the house fell on hard times, as did most of this area economically. The Walkers were forced to abandon the house, actually. And it was eventually purchased by the Augusta Land Company in 1873. And that's the company that opened up the mills here in Harrisburg. There originally were 8 working mills in this village. So they transformed the house into a tenant house for mill workers. You can see from some of these photos here we have up on this panel. They closed off, that's the front of the picture of the front of the house there. They closed off the front porch here. And that second picture shows the back of the house. That they closed off this back porch here. Basically, they made little rooms on the porches. They made little rooms inside of these bigger rooms. Basically, it became a big apartment complex for people who worked at the mills. And that's how the house remained up through the first half of the 20th century. Other people didn't come to own the house, but still was lived in primarily by people who worked at the mills. And then in 1948, that's when the Richmond County Historical Society stepped in and bought the house, and then eventually began to restore it to its original condition. Of course, like I mentioned, they were restoring it to what they thought was the Mackey house. If if they knew true history of the house, they probably wouldn't put all the time and money in restoring it, and the house probably would have fallen apart by now or been torn down. It was in pretty bad shape at that time. So, again, we're very fortunate for that mistake.
Yeah, but you're not comfortable being here. It's just...
No. Not really. That's scary. Not too brave. No, I haven't seen anything. I've heard anything. It's cute, right?
Way, Mark.